The tray smelled wrong. Lyra Voss caught it 3 steps from the kitchen door, a whisper of something bitter riding underneath the wine's oak and blackberry. Oleander. Burnt copper. A combination she had not smelled in 3 years, and one she would never, for as long as she lived, fail to recognize. The tray was heading upstairs. To the Alpha King's private study. Carried by a server named Phoebe who had no idea she was delivering a dead man's last drink. Lyra's hands stopped moving over the potatoes she was peeling. The knife went still. The kitchen noise, all that clattering of pans and Harriet barking orders and someone dropping a colander, faded into a low hum behind her ears. 90 seconds. Maybe less. Phoebe walked fast when she was nervous, and she was always nervous when the tray was bound for the king's floor. Protocol said tell the head steward. Chain of command. Proper channels. Fill out the right form, flag the right person, wait for the right response. Lyra dropped the knife. It clattered against the stone counter, and Harriet turned to yell something, but Lyra was already through the kitchen door and into the corridor. Barefoot. Potato starch still drying on her fingers. She ran. The east corridor of the Blackmore estate was not built for running. It was built for intimidation, all dark stone and high arches and portraits of dead alphas staring down with painted amber eyes. Lyra's feet slapped against marble that had been polished to the texture of wet glass. She nearly went down twice. Did not care. Kept moving. A guard stepped into her path at the base of the main staircase. Simon. Big shoulders, kind face, absolutely committed to procedure. Kitchen staff aren't permitted past the second landing, he said, already reaching for her arm. The wine is poisoned. His hand stopped. Oleander and copper salt, she said, and she was already past him, already taking the stairs 2 at a time, and she heard him swear behind her but did not stop to see if he followed. The 2nd floor. The 3rd. The hallway that led to the Alpha King's wing smelled like cedar and old paper, and it was guarded by 2 wolves she did not know by name. They stepped together when they saw her coming, a wall of muscle and protocol. She did not slow down. The wine on that tray will kill him in 4 minutes, she said, and something in her voice, some edge of absolute certainty, made them hesitate just long enough for her to slip between them like water through a cracked dam. The double doors to the study were closed. Heavy oak, iron-banded, older than the current century. She hit them with both palms. They swung open. The room was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 3 walls. A fire burned low in a stone hearth the size of a small car. Maps covered the desk, pinned at their corners with smooth black stones. The tray sat on the edge of that desk, the wine glass catching firelight, and Phoebe was already backing toward the door with the relieved look of someone whose errand was finished. And Kalen Drev, Alpha King of the Blackmore Pack, ruler of the largest territory on the continent, stood at the window with his back to all of it. He did not turn around. You took longer than I expected, he said. Lyra's lungs were burning. Her feet were numb from the cold marble. Potato starch had dried to a fine white powder on her hands, and she was suddenly, painfully aware that she was standing in the most powerful room on the continent looking like she had crawled out of a root cellar. The wine sat untouched. He already knew. How, she said. It came out broken, more breath than word. Kalen turned then, and she saw his face for the first time without the distance of a courtyard between them. He was tall in a way that reorganized the geometry of the room around him. Dark hair cut close, jaw like something carved for the purpose of ending arguments, and eyes the color of iron left out in the rain. Not warm. Not cold. Patient. The eyes of a man who had been waiting for something and had just watched it walk through his door covered in potato starch. The oleander was detectable at the second landing, he said. I smelled it before the tray reached the corridor. Then why didn't you stop it yourself? Because I wanted to see who else would catch it. The words landed like stones dropped into still water. Lyra felt the ripples move through her, rearranging things she had spent 3 years keeping perfectly still. He was watching her. Not the way an alpha watches a low-rank wolf who has just violated 6 protocols and burst into his private quarters uninvited. He was watching her the way someone watches a sentence they have been reading for a very long time finally reach its period. "You're the girl from the kitchen," he said. Lyra Voss. Transferred in from a border pack 3 years ago. No family on record. No former pack affiliation. Quiet. Competent. Invisible. Each word was precise. Recited. Not remembered in the moment but retrieved from long storage, taken out and dusted off for the occasion. "You keep files on your kitchen staff?" she asked. "No," he said. "Just you." The fire cracked. A log shifted. Sparks drifted upward like lazy orange stars. Lyra became very interested in the potato starch on her hands. She picked at a flake near her thumb. It came off in a perfect crescent. She studied it like it was the most fascinating thing she had ever seen, because the alternative was looking at him, and looking at him was doing something to her chest that she did not have a name for. "The poisoner is still in the building," she said, because that was a fact, and facts were solid things she could stand on when everything else was turning to sand beneath her feet. "I know." "You know who it is?" "I know what they want." "Who they are is a secondary concern." "Secondary to what?" He looked at her for a long time. The fire popped again. Somewhere in the hallway, Simon was arguing with the door guards in a low, urgent voice. "To why you recognized oleander and copper salt by smell alone," Kaylin said. "That's not kitchen training. That's not border pack education. That's a very specific knowledge set from a very specific world, and the girl in your personnel file has never been anywhere near that world." She should have had an answer ready. 3 years of building a cover story, 3 years of practicing the right responses to the wrong questions, and she should have had something smooth and believable sitting on her tongue like a coin. She had nothing. Because he was right. And the way he said it, without accusation, without threat, with that same unhurried patience, told her that he had known this for a long time. He had been sitting on this knowledge the way a wolf sits on a buried bone, not because he was waiting for the right moment to dig it up, but because he wanted to see if she would dig it up herself. "I grew up somewhere complicated," she said. "You grew up in the Ashbourne compound." The name hit her like cold water. Full body. Total immersion. She felt her skin tighten, felt her breath catch in a place behind her ribs that she had bricked shut 3 years ago, felt the room tilt slightly on an axis only she could feel. The Ashbourne compound. The house that burned. The family that fell. The name she had cut out of herself with the precision of a surgeon removing something malignant. "That name doesn't exist anymore," she said. "The name doesn't. The bloodline does." He paused, and something shifted in his expression, a micro-movement in the muscles around his eyes that might have been concern, might have been calculation, might have been something else entirely. "And the person who sent that poisoned wine knows it." Lyra stared at him. The kitchen felt like 1,000 miles away. Harriet's shouting, the clatter of pans, the safe, small world she had built out of root vegetables and anonymity, all of it was dissolving in the space between his words. "The poison wasn't for you," she said. It was not a question. "No," Kaylin said. "It was for you." Mixed into wine they knew I wouldn't drink, carried on a tray they knew would pass through your kitchen, seasoned with a compound they knew only an Ashbourne-trained nose would detect. They wanted you to run. They wanted you to reveal yourself. And I did. And you did. She looked at the door. The hallway beyond it. The staircase, the corridors, the kitchen, the walls of a life she could feel crumbling in real time. "I should leave," she said. "You should. But you won't make it past the eastern border. They have people there already. They've had people there for 6 weeks. You've known about this for 6 weeks? I've known about you for 3 years, Lyra. 6 weeks of threat assessment is just the latest chapter. 3 years. The number sat between them like a living thing. 3 years of her scrubbing floors and peeling potatoes and building a life so small and so quiet that no one would ever look twice. 3 years of believing she had disappeared. And for all 3 of those years, the most powerful wolf on the continent had known exactly who she was, exactly where she came from, and exactly what she was hiding. She thought about the scent of the oleander. The burnt copper underneath it. The way her body had recognized it before her mind caught up, the way her hands had dropped the knife and her feet had started running before she had made any conscious decision to move. Muscle memory. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. Why, she asked. Why leave me alone for 3 years? Why not drag me into this room the first week and demand answers? He walked to his desk. Picked up the wine glass, held it to the light. The liquid caught the firelight and turned the color of dark blood. Because you were afraid, he said. And I wanted to see what you would build when you felt safe. Something in Lyra's chest cracked. Not broke. Cracked. The way a frozen lake cracks in early spring, a sound that is both destruction and the beginning of something. She focused on the wine glass in his hand. The way the firelight moved through it. The way his fingers wrapped around the stem with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that size. The poisoner, she said. You said they'll try again. Within 48 hours. The first attempt was a test. The next one will be operational. Operational for what? For drawing you out into the open. For making you run again. And this time, there will be people waiting at every exit. She looked at the window behind him. The night beyond it was black and vast, and somewhere out there, in the dark spaces between the trees, people she had spent 3 years running from were closing a circle she had not known existed. I can't stay here, she said. You can't leave either. So what am I? He set the wine glass down. Looked at her with those iron rain eyes. And for the first time since she had burst through his doors, something in his expression was not patient or calculated or strategic. It was honest. You're the reason I've been awake every night for 3 years, he said. And I think it's time we talked about why. He did not explain everything. Not that night. He gave her fragments, the way someone feeds a stray cat, just enough to keep it from bolting but never so much that it stops being hungry. He told her to sit. She didn't. She stood by the bookshelf with her arms crossed and her bare feet leaving faint prints on the stone floor, and she listened while the fire burned low and the guards outside the door pretended they could not hear every word. 3 years ago, the night Lyra had arrived at Blackmoor, she had come through the northern woods. Bleeding. Half feral from a 4-day run through unmarked territory with nothing but the clothes on her back and a survival instinct that operated like a second heartbeat. She had crawled under the perimeter fence at a weak spot near the river, made it to the service entrance of the kitchen quarters, and collapsed against the door like a broken umbrella. Harriet had found her. Fed her. Asked no questions. But Kaelin had been on the ramparts that night. 300 yards away, standing on the eastern wall doing his midnight circuit, a habit he had picked up during his first year as king and never bothered to drop. And from that distance, through the cold night air and the pine and the wet earth and the 1,000 other scents that made up the Blackmoor territory at 2 in the morning, her scent had reached him. Cedar smoke. Something green, like crushed fern. And underneath both, something else. Something his wolf had recognized before his brain had formed the word. He did not say the word now. He talked around it the way a man walks around a hole in the floor, aware of its shape, aware of its depth, choosing not to fall in. Your scent is unusual, he said instead. Distinctive. I noticed it, and I continued to notice it. For 3 years. For 3 years. Lyra pressed her back harder against the bookshelf. A leather spine dug into her shoulder blade, and she welcomed it because it was something solid and real and not the sound of Kalin Drev telling her he had been tracking her by smell for 1,000 days. "That's not noticing," she said. "That's something else." He did not argue the point. What he told her next came in pieces. He had not assigned anyone to watch her. He had not ordered reports or surveillance. He had done something quieter and, in many ways, worse. He had paid attention. From the ramparts, from the courtyard, from the balcony above the great hall during meals, he had learned her the way a person learns a piece of music they hear through a wall every day. Not by sitting down and studying it, but by absorbing it through repetition until the melody was mapped inside them and any missed note would register like a fire alarm. He knew her schedule. Not because he had memorized it but because his body had calibrated to it. He knew when she crossed the courtyard on her way to the kitchen at dawn because something in him settled when she did. He knew when she stayed late scrubbing pots because the air in the east wing carried a particular mixture of soap and warm water and her that told him she was still there. And her scent changed. He had learned that too. It was not static. It shifted with her moods in ways that were more expressive than her face, which she kept carefully neutral at all times. Anger turned her sharp, metallic, like iron filings scattered on a hot surface. When she lied, her scent went cold and clean, like rain on pavement. And when she laughed, really laughed, the kind that came from somewhere deep and unguarded, she smelled like fresh bread and something underneath it that he had spent 3 years trying to name and never could. He kept a record. Lyra found it the next morning. He had given her a room on the 3rd floor, 2 doors down from his own quarters. Not a servant's room. A proper room with a bed that had actual sheets and a window that overlooked the courtyard and a lock on the inside of the door that she tested 3 times before she believed it worked. She did not sleep. She sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the sounds of the Blackmore estate settling into its bones for the night, and she thought about the word he had not said. Mate. She knew what it meant. Every wolf knew. The biological lock and key of it, the way 2 scents could interlock like puzzle pieces cut from the same original image. It was the reason love stories existed and the reason wars started and the reason some wolves spent their entire lives walking into rooms and breathing deep, searching for the one scent that would make their wolf go quiet. She thought about what it meant that he had found it and said nothing. Done nothing. For 3 years, he had held that knowledge inside him like a man holding a live coal, and he had not once reached for her, not once pulled rank, not once used the bond to make a claim. She was not sure if that made him noble or insane. At dawn, she left the room and went looking for answers the way she always did, by putting her hands on something physical and turning it over until its secrets fell out. His study was unlocked. Later she would wonder if he left it that way on purpose. The leather-bound book was in the top drawer of his desk. Unlabeled on the outside, locked with a clasp that was more decorative than functional. She opened it with a hairpin she kept in her back pocket, a leftover habit from her old life, and she read. It was not a surveillance log. There were no times, no coordinates, no tactical assessments. It was sensory. Personal. Written in a handwriting that was precise and controlled on the first pages and became progressively less so as the entries continued, as if the act of recording her was slowly unraveling something in him that he needed to keep tight. The first entry read, cedar smoke, fern, and something I cannot identify. Northern perimeter. She is injured. I am staying here. The last entry, dated 2 days ago, read, she laughed in the kitchen today. The staff had flour on their faces. The unnamed thing was stronger than usual. I stood in the corridor for 11 minutes. 3 years of entries. Some were single lines. Some ran for half a page. All of them were written to no one, addressed to no audience, intended for no eyes but his own. They were the private accounting of a man who had found the most important thing in his life hiding in his kitchen and had decided, for reasons the book never fully explained, to love it from a distance. Lyra closed the book. She sat in his chair, a massive, leather-backed thing that smelled like him, and she pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes until she saw bright spots, and she tried to sort what she was feeling into categories she could manage. Fury. That was the easy one. He had watched her. Without her knowledge, without her consent, he had turned her existence into a private study, a one-man research project into what it sounded like when she breathed. And underneath the fury, something else. Something she did not want to name because naming it would mean admitting that no one in her entire life had ever paid this much attention to whether she existed. Not her father, who had traded his pack's future for a handshake. Not her mother, who had disappeared 2 years before the fire. Not anyone in the 3 years since, during which she had perfected the art of being no one. And here was this man. This king. This wolf who controlled 6 territories and commanded 10,000 soldiers. And he had spent 11 minutes standing in a hallway because she laughed. She heard his footsteps before he appeared. Deliberate. Unhurried. Giving her time to prepare or to run. He stood in the doorway and looked at her sitting in his chair with his book in her lap and her eyes red and her bare feet tucked under her like a child, and whatever he saw in that picture made something in his expression fracture, a tiny crack in the iron composure, barely visible, immediately repaired. "You had no right," she said. "No," he agreed. "I didn't. This is invasion. This is you turning me into a specimen. I know. Do you? Do you actually understand what it feels like to find out someone has been cataloging your existence without your permission for 3 years?" He stepped into the room. Not toward her. Toward the window. His default position, she was beginning to realize. The place he went when he needed to look at something that was not the thing making him feel too much. "I understand," he said, "that there were 2 options. Claim you the night you arrived, which would have terrified you, exposed your identity, and removed every choice you had. Or wait. Let you build something. Let you feel safe. And accept that the waiting would cost me more than you would ever know." The book sat heavy in her lap. 3 years of ink and longing, compressed into leather and paper. She threw it at his head. He caught it without turning from the window. One hand. Clean grab. Like catching a tossed apple. She wanted to scream. She wanted to cry. She wanted to go back to the kitchen and peel potatoes and pretend that nothing in the world existed beyond the radius of Harriet's shouting. But the kitchen was not safe anymore. The kitchen had never been safe. She had been standing in the open for 3 years, and the only reason nothing had found her was because something bigger had been standing between her and the dark. "The poisoner," she said, pulling herself back to solid ground. "You said they'd try again within 48 hours. Yes. And you said whoever sent them knows who I am. They know what you are. Who you are is secondary to them. What's the difference?" He set the book on the windowsill. Turned to face her. The morning light behind him made his silhouette look like something carved out of the architecture itself, like the building had grown him as a structural element. "The Ashbourne bloodline carries a genetic trait," he said. "A mutation in the pheromone system. You already know this." She did. She had known since she was 13, when her mother had sat her down in the garden and explained why she could do things other wolves could not. Why she could flatten her scent to nothing, erase herself from the olfactory landscape like wiping a name off a chalkboard. Why she could, with concentration and practice, reshape her scent to mimic another wolf's, wearing their identity like a borrowed coat. It was the reason she had survived the fire. The reason she had crossed 4 territories without being tracked. The reason she had walked into Blackmore smelling like nobody, like nothing, like a ghost made of cedar smoke and desperation. "A coalition of rogue pack leaders has been looking for you for 2 years, Kaelin said. They don't want to hurt you. They want to use you. Your ability, weaponized and replicated, would make infiltration, assassination, and territorial subversion undetectable. The wars that ended a decade ago would start again overnight. And you know all of this because you've been tracking the coalition. I know all of this because the coalition approached me first. 18 months ago. They offered me an alliance in exchange for any information I had on surviving Ashbourne carriers. The room tilted. Very slightly. Just enough to remind Lyra that the floor was not as solid as it looked. And what did you tell them? I told them the Ashbourne line was extinct. One sentence. 7 words. And in those 7 words, the entire shape of the last 3 years rearranged itself. He had not just watched her. He had not just kept her secret. He had lied to the most dangerous people on the continent to keep her hidden. She stared at him. The fire was out. The morning sun was climbing the walls. And somewhere in the building, a poisoner named Drusen was planning his next move, and the clock was running, and the world outside this room was full of wolves who wanted to turn her blood into a weapon. So I'm a prisoner, she said. You're the reason there's still a ceasefire. Not the same thing. Not even close. The distance between those 2 truths was a canyon, and they stood on opposite sides of it, and neither of them had any idea how to build a bridge. What happens now? She asked. Now, Kaelin said, picking up the book from the windowsill and placing it back in the drawer with a care that bordered on tenderness, we find Drusen before Drusen finds you. And you decide how much of your old life you're willing to let back in. She looked at the drawer. At the book inside it. At the 3 years of his handwriting and his patience and his terrifying, meticulous devotion. I didn't ask for any of this, she said. Neither did I. He left the room. His footsteps faded down the corridor, steady and measured, the walk of a man who had learned to move through the world at a speed that never betrayed how fast his heart was actually beating. Lyra sat in his chair for a long time. The leather smelled like cedar and iron and something warm that she did not have a name for. She decided not to name it. Not yet. The name she had buried was Lyra Ashbourne. Not a minor house. Not a border pack scratching for territory at the edges of someone else's map. The Ashbourne pack had held treaty power over 6 regions for 4 generations, a bloodline so deeply woven into the political fabric of the continent that removing it had torn holes that were still unrepaired a decade later. Her father, Gregor Ashbourne, had been a man who believed in alliances the way some men believe in religion, with absolute faith and no contingency plan. He had signed a mutual defense pact with the Hale Confederacy when Lyra was 14, trading military access and territorial concessions for a promise of protection that turned out to be written in disappearing ink. The Hale Wolves had come through the eastern gate at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday in November. Lyra remembered it was a Tuesday because she had a history exam the next day and had been up late studying, sitting cross-legged on her bed with flashcards spread around her like fallen leaves. She remembered the sound of glass breaking downstairs. She remembered her father's voice, not shouting but speaking in a tone she had never heard before, flat and emptied of everything that made it his. She remembered the smell of smoke. What happened between that Tuesday and the day she crawled under the Blackmore fence 4 years later was a locked room inside her. She did not open it. She did not furnish it. She did not stand outside its door and press her ear to the wood hoping to hear what was moving around inside. She had sealed it shut with every tool available to her, and the seal held, and she intended to keep it that way until she was dead or until the world ended, whichever came first. Kaelin's scent journal had a gap in it, she noticed. A page near the middle where the careful handwriting was replaced by a single line, written in ink that was slightly different from the rest, as if he had put down his usual pen and picked up another one for this entry alone. It read, "Something happened to her that I am not entitled to know." She read that line 4 times. Each time it hit different. The first time it made her angry, because who was he to decide what he was entitled to? The second time it confused her, because restraint from an alpha was like snow in July, theoretically possible but deeply suspicious. The third time it made her throat tight in a way she did not appreciate. The fourth time she closed the book and did not open it again. Drusen found her before she found him. 2 days after the wine incident, Lyra was crossing the courtyard at dusk, heading from the laundry building to the kitchen entrance, carrying a basket of folded napkins that Harriet needed for the evening meal. The courtyard was mostly empty. A few guards on the far wall. A groundskeeper raking leaves near the fountain. The sky was turning that shade of deep blue that comes just before the dark catches up to it. He stepped out of the shadows near the tool shed like he had been part of them a moment before. Average height. Lean build. A scar that started at the corner of his left eye and disappeared under his collar, a white line that looked less like an injury and more like a signature, like someone had signed his face with a blade to make sure no one forgot who had been there. He was smiling. Not a threatening smile. Worse. A friendly one. "You must be the kitchen girl," he said. "Lyra, isn't it? I just transferred in from the southern station. They've got me on maintenance for the West Wing." The napkins in the basket were white. Freshly pressed. Lyra stared at the top one, at the crisp fold Harriet had taught her to make, the one that turned a flat piece of fabric into a standing fan, and she counted the creases because counting was better than reacting, and reacting would tell him something she could not afford to give away. His scent was wrong. Controlled. Flattened in a way that was technically competent but lacked the subtlety of someone born to the skill. He was masking, and he was good at it, but Lyra had grown up in a house where scent manipulation was a family trade, and the difference between his version and hers was the difference between a forged painting and the original. Same image. Different brushstrokes. "Welcome to Blackmore," she said. "Harriet runs the kitchen. She'll tell you when meals are served." Appreciated. "It's a big place. Easy to get lost. Stay on the marked paths and you'll be fine." She walked past him. Did not speed up. Did not change direction. Kept the basket balanced on her hip and her breathing even and her scent locked down so tight that a wolf standing 2 feet away would smell nothing but clean laundry and evening air. She made it to the kitchen door. Put down the basket. Told Harriet she needed to use the restroom. Walked to the bathroom at the end of the corridor, locked the door, and stood with her hands on the sink until the shaking stopped. Drusen. It had to be. The soft-spoken wolf Kaelin had described, the one who moved through staff like smoke. He was here. He was already inside the walls. And he had looked at her with the calm, patient friendliness of a man who had all the time in the world, because he knew she had nowhere left to go. She found Kaelin in the war room on the 4th floor, a space she had not known existed until Owen, his beta, had escorted her there with an expression that said he had many questions and had been instructed to ask none of them. The war room was exactly what it sounded like. Maps on every surface, some printed, some hand-drawn, some marked with pins and colored string that created a web complex enough to make a spider feel inadequate. Kaelin stood at the center table with George, his senior advisor, a gray-haired wolf with the build of a retired athlete and the eyes of someone who had stopped being surprised by anything 40 years ago. "He's here," Lyra said. Kaelin looked up. George looked at Kaelin. Owen looked at the floor. "Drusen?" Kaelin asked. He introduced himself as a maintenance transfer from the southern station. His scent is masked. Professionally, but not perfectly. He has a scar running from his left eye to his collar. George pulled a folder from a stack on the side table. Opened it. Turned it so Lyra could see the photograph inside. Same face. Same scar. Different name on the file. "He came in 6 days ago," George said. Documentation was clean. References checked out. "We flagged the scar but it didn't match any active alert profiles. Because the alerts are looking for the wrong things," Lyra said. "He's not a fighter. He's a recruiter. The scar isn't from combat. It's a brand. The Hale Confederacy marks their intelligence operatives with a signature cut from the handler who trained them. It's a loyalty mark. It means he belongs to someone. The room went quiet. The kind of quiet that has weight to it, that presses against your eardrums and makes you aware of your own heartbeat. George looked at Kaylin with an expression that contained an entire unspoken conversation. Kaylin's jaw tightened by a fraction of a degree. You recognized a Hale Intelligence brand on sight, George said to Lyra. In the dark. From a passing glance. It was not a question. It was an invitation to explain how a kitchen girl from a defunct border pack would have that particular piece of classified knowledge sitting in her head like it belonged there. Lyra looked at Kaylin. He looked back. And in the space between their eyes, a negotiation happened that required no words. He was asking her how much she was willing to reveal. She was telling him that the time for half-truths had passed about 48 hours ago. My name isn't Lyra Voss, she said, turning to George. It's Lyra Ashbourne. My father was Gregor Ashbourne, Pack Alpha of the Ashbourne Territory. The Hale Confederacy destroyed my family when I was 16. I've been hiding in your kitchen for 3 years. George's expression did not change. Not because he was not surprised, but because he was the kind of man who processed surprise internally and only let it out after it had been through quality control. Ashbourne, he repeated. Yes. The Ashbourne mutation. Yes. He looked at Kaylin again. This time the unspoken conversation was longer. You knew, George said to his king. From the beginning. George closed the folder. Set it down. Placed both hands flat on the table in the manner of a man who was choosing his next words with the care of a bomb technician choosing which wire to cut. The coalition, he said. The approach 18 months ago. The reason you lied to some very dangerous people about the Ashbourne bloodline being extinct. This is her. This is her. Lyra watched the two men navigate the revelation with the practiced economy of people who had been managing crises together for years. There was no shouting, no recriminations, no dramatic confrontation about trust or deception. There was a recalibration. A shifting of weight from one foot to the other. An adjustment of the map to include a new territory that had been there all along, hidden under a napkin and a fake name. Drewson's assignment is extraction, Kaylin said. He's not here to kill anyone. He's here to isolate Lyra from the pack structure, create a situation where she has no choice but to run, and have a team waiting outside the perimeter to collect her. The poisoned wine, Lyra said. First move. Designed to make you panic and bolt. When you ran to my study instead of for the exit, they had to adjust. So his introduction in the courtyard was the adjustment. He's mapping your patterns. Your connections. Your pressure points. He'll find the thing you care about most inside these walls and threaten it. When you run to protect it, the extraction team moves in. Lyra thought about Harriet. About Nora, the young cook who sang while she worked and had taught Lyra how to make a sauce that required stirring for 45 minutes without stopping. About the kitchen, the small warm room that smelled like bread and garlic and the ordinary, unremarkable piece of a life built on purpose. I won't let him use them, she said. He won't have the chance. I'm moving you out of the kitchen staff. Effective immediately, you're assigned to my personal guard. The silence that followed was different from the earlier one. This one had a temperature. It was warm. Your personal guard, she said. It's a position that keeps you inside the inner ring of security. It puts you under the direct protection of the Alpha household. And it makes any move against you an act of war against the crown. It also means I sleep 30 feet from your bedroom. Owen developed a fascination with the ceiling. George picked up the folder again and pretended to read something very important inside it. Kaylin held her gaze with the absolute stillness of a man who knows he is walking a wire and has decided not to look down. The room is secure, he said. The door locks from the inside. And I have never, in 3 years, crossed a line you didn't draw first. She wanted to argue. She wanted to point out that 3 years of secret scent surveillance was a fairly significant line, drawn or undrawn. She wanted to tell him that rearranging her life without her consent, no matter how good the reasons, was the same thing her father had done to her family, and look how that had turned out. But Drusen was in the courtyard. The coalition was at the border. The poisoner had already made his first move, and the second was coming, and the world outside this room was full of wolves who wanted to turn her into a weapon, and the world inside this room contained exactly one person who had spent 3 years making sure that did not happen. "Fine," she said. "But I want the scent book." "Why?" "Because if you're going to keep a record of me, I should at least get editorial control." Something happened to his mouth. Not a smile. Smiles were too common a word for the specific, controlled micro-expression that passed across Kalin Drev's face in that moment. It was more like a crack in a dam, a tiny fissure through which something enormous and pressurized leaked for exactly 1 second before the structure reasserted itself. George noticed. Owen noticed. Neither said a word. Kalin opened the desk drawer, took out the leather-bound book, and held it out to her. She took it. Their fingers did not touch. The space between his hand and hers was approximately 1 inch, and it was the loudest inch in the room. "I'll have your things moved within the hour," he said. "I don't have things." "Then it should be a quick move." She left the war room with the book under her arm and the distinct, unsettling sensation that she was walking not away from danger but directly into the center of something far more dangerous than the coalition, the poisoner, and the Hale Confederacy combined. She was walking into the gravitational field of a man who had been orbiting her for 3 years and had just been given permission to close the distance. And the worst part, the absolute, unforgivable worst part, was that some traitorous corner of her chest was glad. The room was small and plain and perfect. A narrow bed against the wall. A wooden desk under the window. A wardrobe that was empty because she owned nothing to put in it. And a door with a lock that worked, which she tested 5 times the first night, turning the bolt and releasing it until the mechanism felt like an extension of her own hand. Kalin's quarters were 30 feet to the left. She knew this because she could hear him moving at night, the soft rhythm of footsteps across stone, and because his scent seeped under the door like something liquid, cedar and iron and the warm unnamed thing that she had now encountered enough times to know it was not a component of his environment but a component of him. She read the scent journal from the beginning. Not in one sitting. She rationed it the way a person rations water in a dry season, a few pages at a time, enough to sustain but not enough to drown. She read it at the desk by candlelight after the guards changed shifts, when the hallway was quiet and the building settled into the low hum of its nighttime breathing. The early entries were clinical. Factual. The observations of a man who was recording data, not feelings. Cedar and fern. Northern quadrant. 2:14, moving east. Scent, location, time, direction. A tracking log stripped of anything personal. The shift began around month 4. The entries got longer. Descriptors crept in that had no business in a tactical report. The fern note was stronger today, warmer, as if she spent time near the kitchen fires. And then, a few pages later, she crossed the courtyard during the noon meal. The sun was behind her. Cedar and sunlight. I lost count of the minutes. By the end of the first year, the journal had abandoned any pretense of objectivity. The entries read like letters to someone who would never read them, written by a man who knew he was talking to himself and could not stop. She was angry today. The iron filing sharpness cut through 2 walls and a closed door. I don't know what caused it. I want to know. I have no right to know. These 2 truths sit side by side like teeth in the same jaw, and I am learning to live with the bite. She closed the book after that entry and stared at the candle flame until her vision blurred. The days that followed were a new kind of life, structured around proximity and purpose. As a member of the personal guard, Lyra attended briefings, walked the inner perimeter, and stood post outside meeting rooms where territorial decisions were made by wolves who had no idea the woman at the door could identify every person in the building by scent alone without looking. She also began to learn Kaylin. Not from the journal. From observation. From the daily accumulation of small truths that proximity makes unavoidable. He slept 4 hours a night. Sometimes less. She could hear him pacing at 2 in the morning, the same circuit she had sensed from her kitchen quarters but now rendered in full detail, the way his steps slowed near the window and quickened near the door, as if the room itself was an argument he was having with himself. He ate alone. Every meal. Not in his study, where at least the books would keep him company, but at a small table in a room off the kitchen that the staff called the alcove, a windowless space that smelled like old stone and solitude. He ate quickly and without pleasure, the way a machine takes fuel. He did not laugh. She catalogued this absence with the same attention he had given to cataloguing her scent, and the ledger came up empty. In 3 weeks of constant proximity, she did not hear him laugh once. And he did not shift. This was the thing that puzzled her most, because an alpha who did not shift was like a river that did not flow, technically still water, but something essential was missing. Every alpha she had ever known, including her father, shifted regularly. It was maintenance. Hygiene for the wolf inside, a necessary release of the animal pressure that built up behind the human facade. Kaylin had not shifted in 4 years. She learned this from Owen, who told her in the careful, measured tones of a man who was sharing classified information while pretending he was making casual conversation. He doesn't talk about it, Owen said. They were in the armory, where Lyra was learning to handle the weapons she would carry as part of her guard duties. Owen was showing her the weight balance of a standard-issue blade, but his eyes kept drifting to the corridor, checking for Kaylin the way a child checks for thunder after lightning. When did he stop? Lyra asked. The night he became king. She waited. Owen weighed the blade in his hand, turning it slowly, watching the light travel along its edge. His father was the previous alpha. Ronan Drev. Big man. Loud voice. The kind of leader who made you feel safe and terrified at the same time. He ruled for 22 years, and every one of those years wore a groove into him, and by the end the grooves had become cracks, and the cracks had become something else. He paused. Set the blade down. Ronan challenged Kaylin on a winter night. No warning. No formal declaration. He walked into Kaylin's quarters at midnight, shifted, and attacked. Kaylin was 22 years old. He had been asleep. Lyra's hand tightened on the blade she was holding. The grip dug into her palm. The fight lasted 9 minutes. Kaylin won. Ronan did not survive. And Kaylin carried a scar from that night that runs from his collarbone to his hip, a reminder that the first thing his wolf ever did as alpha was kill the man who gave him life. Owen picked up the blade again. Inspected it as if checking for flaws. He hasn't shifted since. He governs from the human side. The wolf is there, it's always there, but he keeps it locked because the last time he let it out, it only knew how to do one thing. And no one's challenged him for it? People have challenged him. He wins without shifting. He's that strong on the human side alone, and that fact alone is enough to make most wolves think twice. But there's a limit. The wolf can only be contained so long before the containment itself becomes the danger. Lyra thought about the pacing at 2 in the morning. The 4 hours of sleep. The meals eaten alone in a windowless room. The man was not living. He was managing a siege from the inside, holding his own walls against an enemy that shared his skin. She found him that evening in the study. He was reading a treaty document, or pretending to. The pages hadn't turned in the 20 minutes she had been standing outside the door, working up something she refused to call courage. She knocked. He said, "Come in." She sat in the chair across from his desk, the visitor's chair, not his chair, because sitting in his chair again felt like something she was not ready for. Owen told me about your father, she said. Kaylin set down the treaty. His expression was the same controlled neutrality she had come to recognize as his default state, the resting face of a man who had trained himself to feel nothing in public. But his scent shifted. She caught it, the iron filing sharpness that meant something was moving under the surface, something with teeth. Owen talks too much, he said. Owen talks exactly enough. He told me what he thought I needed to know. And what do you need to know? Why you don't shift. You already know why. I know the story. I'm asking about the reason. Because a man who doesn't shift for 4 years isn't afraid of his wolf. He's punishing it. The neutrality cracked. Just for a moment. A flash of something raw underneath, something that looked out at her from behind his eyes like a prisoner looking through a slot in a cell door. My wolf killed my father, he said. Your wolf defended your life. Those are the same event. They are not the same event, and the fact that you've convinced yourself they are is the reason you pace your room at 2 in the morning instead of sleeping. She was pushing. She knew she was pushing. Every instinct she had built in 3 years of invisibility was screaming at her to stop, to retreat, to fold herself back into the small quiet shape that kept her safe. But safe had gotten her a kitchen and a fake name and a life so compressed that she could fit the whole thing in a napkin, and she was tired of fitting. Kaylin stood. Walked to the window. His default. You read the journal, he said. All of it. Then you know what happens when I get close to something I care about. You study it from a distance. I keep it alive. The words landed with the weight of a confession. Not dramatic. Not grand. Quiet. The kind of truth that lives in the basement of a person and only comes upstairs when the house is very dark and very still. Lyra looked at the scar. She could see the top of it at his collar, a white ridge of tissue that traced the path of his father's last act. The mark of a fight he had won and lost at the same time. You're not your father, she said. You don't know that. I know that a man who spends 3 years writing about the way someone smells instead of claiming them is not a man who attacks people in their sleep. He turned from the window. The iron rain eyes were different now. Less controlled. More present. The look of a man who had been holding a door shut for 4 years and was feeling the hinges give. My wolf doesn't want to hurt you, he said. It wants to keep you. And I don't trust the difference. Maybe you should let someone else be the judge of that. She stood up. Crossed the room. Stopped at a distance that was close enough to matter and far enough to leave him a way out. I'm going to do something, she said. And I need you to stay exactly where you are. She dropped her scent. Not all of it. Not yet. She lowered the mask she had been holding for 3 years, the one that made her smell like nothing, like clean air, like a space where a person should be but wasn't. She let the cedar come through. The fern. The warm unnamed thing that he had written about in 100 entries and never identified. And something else. The real bottom layer. The thing underneath all the components, the base note that was purely, irreducibly her. The scent she had been born with and had spent her entire adult life hiding because it was the thing that made her valuable and the thing that made her vulnerable and the thing that, in the right hands, could end wars or start them. She let him smell it. Kaylin's entire body went still. Not tense. Still. The way a lake goes still when the wind stops, when the surface becomes a mirror and you can see all the way to the bottom. His wolf, the one he had locked away 4 years ago, the one that only knew how to do one thing, did not surge. Did not snarl. Did not rise. It settled. She watched it happen in his face. The loosening of the jaw. The softening around the eyes. The way his shoulders dropped from the position they had held for so long she doubted he remembered they were raised. For years of siege, for years of holding the walls, and her scent walked through every barricade he had built like they were made of paper. How long has it been since it was quiet, she asked. He closed his eyes. "I don't remember," he said. And she understood, with a clarity that made her chest ache, that she had become the only room in the world where this man could breathe. They began to orbit each other like binary stars, too much gravity to separate, too much heat to touch. Mornings were the easiest. Lyra stood post outside the war room while Kaylin and George reviewed intelligence reports and territorial disputes and the thousand small negotiations that kept a continent-sized pack from falling apart. She could hear his voice through the door, steady and measured, issuing decisions with the casual precision of a man who had been governing since before he was ready and had gotten good at it the way people get good at anything they do every day for years. Evenings were harder. After the guards changed and the hallways emptied, the 30 feet between their doors shrank to something that felt like 30 inches, and the building grew quiet enough to hear everything. His pacing. Her breathing. The small, private sounds of two people existing in parallel, aware of each other the way the tide is aware of the moon. She began leaving the scent journal on his desk with notes in the margins. Small things at first. Corrections, mostly. It wasn't the fire that made the fern note stronger. "I'd been in the herb garden." And later, "You're wrong about the iron." That wasn't anger. "I was cutting onions and nicked my finger." Actual iron. He would retrieve the book, read her annotations, and return it to the drawer without comment, but the next entry would reference her corrections with a formality that made her want to throw something at him again. It was the closest thing to a conversation either of them knew how to have. Drusen made his second move on a Wednesday. Lyra was in the courtyard, crossing from the guard station to the main hall, when she heard Nora screaming. Not the kind of scream that comes from surprise or minor injury. The kind that starts somewhere below the lungs and arrives in the air already broken. Lyra ran. Her body made the decision before her mind finished processing the sound, and she was through the kitchen door and past the prep stations and into the cold storage room in a time she could not have measured if she tried. Nora was on the floor. Not hurt. Terrified. Pressed against the far wall with her arms over her head and her body pulled into the smallest shape it could manage, and Drusen was standing 3 feet from her with his hands in his pockets and a look on his face that was worse than menace. It was patience. "I was just asking about the schedule," he said, turning to Lyra with the same friendly smile from the courtyard. She got startled. "My fault. I should have knocked." Nora was shaking. The kind of shaking that comes from the whole body at once, a full system response to something that the conscious mind has not yet categorized but the animal brain has already labeled as existential threat. Lyra looked at Drusen. Looked at the space between him and Nora. Looked at the door behind her, which he had propped open with a brick. He had planned this. The isolation, the enclosed space, the casual explanation ready for anyone who walked in. He had not touched Nora. He didn't need to. He had cornered her and let the implication do the work, and the implication was designed not for Nora but for Lyra, because Drusen understood something fundamental about the woman he was hunting. She would not run for herself. She would run for someone else. "Get away from her," Lyra said. "I'm just standing here." "You're standing there like a man who knows exactly what he's doing. Move. Now." He moved. Not fast, not slow. The pace of a man who was making a point about who was in control of the timing. He passed her at the door. Close enough that his scent washed over her in a controlled wave, and under the mask he was wearing she caught it, the metallic signature of hail conditioning, the chemical cocktail that intelligence operatives use to dampen their natural scent and replace it with something forgettable. "Nice talking to you, Lyra," he said. He knew her name. Her real name sat behind his teeth like a loaded round, and the way he said the fake one was a reminder that he could fire whenever he chose. She got Nora out of the cold storage and into the kitchen, wrapped her in an apron because it was the nearest piece of fabric, sat her on a stool, and told Harriet that Nora needed the rest of the day off. Harriet asked no questions. Harriet had survived long enough in a packhouse kitchen to know when questions were a luxury the situation could not afford. Lyra went straight to the fourth floor. Kalen was alone in the war room. Maps spread before him, colored pins catching the lamplight. He looked up when she entered and something in her face told him everything before she opened her mouth. He went after Nora, she said. Kalen's hand, the one holding a pin, went still. He didn't touch her. He cornered her. Made her scream. Waited for me to find them. He's not trying to take me by force. He's trying to make me choose between staying hidden and protecting the people around me. And when you choose to protect them, you expose yourself. He's counting on it. The next time it won't be Nora. It'll be someone else, or something worse, and eventually I'll have to move openly, and his extraction team will be ready. Kalen set the pin down. Placed both hands flat on the table. The gesture reminded her of George, the same deliberate containment of energy, the same careful management of what his body communicated while his mind worked at a speed his face refused to betray. I have a proposal, he said. You won't like it. I haven't liked anything about the last 2 weeks. What's one more? We stop waiting. We stop defending. We give Drusen what he wants. She stared at him. We let him think he's flushed you out. We manufacture a situation where you appear to run, and when the extraction team moves in, we take them apart. Using me as bait. Using you as the door they walk through into a room they don't walk out of. She turned the idea over. It had the shape of something that could work and the feel of something that could go catastrophically wrong. The hinge point was clear, everything depended on Kalen's people being faster and better positioned than Drusen's people, and that depended on knowing where Drusen's people were, and they did not know that yet. There's another option, she said. I'm listening. Drusen's people are positioned around the perimeter. But they're keyed to my scent. They're waiting for a specific olfactory signature to cross the border, and when it does, they close the net. Correct. So what if the scent crosses the border, but I don't? He understood. She saw it arrive in his eyes, the click of a mechanism engaging, tumblers falling into place behind the iron and the rain. You can project your scent, he said. I can project my scent to a fixed point up to half a mile away if the wind is right. I can make Drusen's entire extraction team chase a ghost through the northern woods while your people close in behind them. You've done this before. It was not a question. I escaped the Ashbourne compound by making 30 hail trackers follow a scent trail to an empty barn while I went the other direction. It works. But it has a cost. What cost? While I'm projecting, I can't mask myself. My real scent will be fully exposed for anyone in the immediate area. If there's a secondary team, if Drusen has a backup plan, I'll be broadcasting my exact location to everyone within range. The risk sat between them on the table, as clear and sharp as the blade Owen had shown her in the armory. I'll be with you, Kalen said. That's not a tactical plan. That's a promise. It's both. She looked at him across the table full of maps and pins and the accumulated intelligence of a man who had been fighting a quiet war for 3 years to keep her alive. He looked back. And for the first time in their acquaintance, either of them broke eye contact first. There's something else, she said. If this works, if we dismantle the extraction team, Drusen won't give up. He'll escalate. And the only escalation left is a formal challenge. I know. A formal challenge means you fight in shifted form. Tradition requires it. You can't face him as a human. I know. You haven't shifted in 4 years. I know, Lyra. Her name in his mouth was a different thing than Drusen saying it. When Drusen said her name, it was a pin in a board. When Kalen said it, it was a key turning in a lock that neither of them had built and neither of them could break. If you shift, she said, your wolf might not come back. If I don't shift, they'll take you. Not a choice. An equation. The variables were fixed, the solution was determined, and the only question remaining was how much it would cost. They executed the plan 2 nights later. Lyra stood at the eastern wall at midnight, in the shadow of the guard tower, with Kaelin 3 feet to her left and Owen's tactical team positioned in a crescent formation through the northern tree line. The moon was half full, casting the kind of pale, theatrical light that made everything look like a stage set for something important. She closed her eyes, drew a breath, and pushed. The scent went out like a flare, a concentrated burst of cedar and fern, and the bottom layer signature that made her an Ashbourne, projected along the wind current toward the northern woods. She felt it leave her, felt the effort of it in her chest and behind her eyes, the metabolic cost of doing something her body was designed for but rarely asked to do at full capacity. Within 90 seconds, movement in the tree line. Drusen's team, 6 of them, tracking the scent with the focused urgency of wolves who had been waiting weeks for this exact signal. They ran north. The ghost trail pulled them deep into the woods, following a scent that was vivid and convincing and attached to absolutely nothing. Owen's team closed behind them like a jaw. It was over in 12 minutes. No casualties. All 6 members of the extraction team pinned, disarmed, and secured. Owen's voice crackled through the communication device at Kaelin's belt, confirming capture with the clipped efficiency of someone who had done this enough times to find it routine. Lyra released the projection and sagged against the wall. The effort had drained her in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion, a deep cellular fatigue that made her bones feel hollow. Her real scent flooded the immediate area, unmasked, uncontrolled, the fullest and most honest version of herself she had ever let exist in open air. Kaelin caught her arm. The first time he had touched her. His hand was warm and his grip was careful and his entire body was shaking, not from cold, not from adrenaline, but from the effort of being this close to her real scent and keeping his wolf behind the wall he had built 4 years ago. "It worked," she said. "You're bleeding." She touched her upper lip. Her fingers came away red. The projection had burst something small inside her, a capillary toll for the effort. She wiped it with the back of her hand and the gesture was so ordinary, so casual, that it cracked something in the formal structure of the moment, and for half a second they were just 2 people leaning against a wall in the dark, breathing hard, alive. Drusen was not among the captured. George delivered this information the next morning with the controlled expression of a man presenting a chess position that has deteriorated. Drusen had not been with his extraction team. He had watched the operation from a secondary position, observed its failure, and retreated into the Blackmore population like a coin dropped into a fountain, sinking below the surface where no one could reach. And then, 2 days later, the challenge arrived. Formal. Written. Sealed with the mark of the Hale Confederacy and delivered to the front gate by a wolf who did not wait for a response. The document invoked old law, older than the current pack structure, older than the Blackmore territory itself. It claimed Lyra Ashbourne as a genetic asset belonging to a dissolved pack whose surviving members retained rights of reclamation under the Continental Accord. It named Drusen as the designated representative of the surviving Ashbourne affiliates. And it demanded a resolution by combat, in shifted form, within 72 hours. The challenge was not addressed to Lyra. It was addressed to the Alpha King. Kaelin read it in the war room. Set it down. Looked at George, then at Owen, then at the maps and pins and the accumulated evidence of a fight that had been building for 3 years and had finally arrived at the moment it was always going to arrive at. 72 hours, George said. Yes. You haven't shifted in 4 years. Everyone keeps reminding me. Because it's relevant. Kaelin stood. Walked to the window. His default, his refuge, the place he went when the room was too full of things he could not say. The night before the challenge, Lyra went to his study. She did not knock. She had stopped knocking weeks ago, and the progression from knock to no knock was its own story, a small, wordless negotiation of boundaries that had been happening beneath the surface of every interaction they had shared since she sat in his chair and threw his book at his head. He was at the window. Back to the door. The scent journal lay open on his desk, turned to a new page. She walked to the desk and looked down at the entry. 2 words, written in his careful, controlled handwriting. She's here. Written before she arrived. He always knew. The fire was low. The room was warm. And the distance between them, the distance he had maintained for 3 years with the discipline of a man who understood that some things are more powerful for being withheld, was no longer something either of them could sustain. She crossed the room. Stopped in front of him. He turned from the window, and she saw his face in the firelight, the hard jaw and the iron eyes and the scar that began at his collar and traced its way down his chest like a road map of everything he had survived. She put her hand on the scar. Over the fabric of his shirt, she pressed her palm flat against the ridge of tissue, and she felt his heartbeat through the cloth, and it was fast, the first time she had ever known it to be anything other than measured, and the fact that her touch could accelerate the pulse of a man who governed 6 territories without flinching made something in her chest unfold like a fist opening. His hand came up. Hovered near her jaw. Then landed, his fingers tracing the line from her ear to her chin with a delicacy that belonged to a man handling something he had studied for 1,000 days and was touching for the first time. His hand was shaking. She felt it against her skin, the tremor of restraint pushed to its structural limit. If you shift tomorrow, she said, you might not come back. If I don't, they'll take you. She closed her eyes. His thumb brushed her cheekbone. The touch was so light it was more like a question than a statement. I'm going to do something, she said. And this time I'm not holding back. She dropped everything. Every mask. Every layer. Every survival mechanism she had constructed since she was 16 years old, standing in a garden while her mother explained what made her different and why she could never let anyone know. She let all of it fall, and what was left was the raw, undiluted, completely honest scent of who she was. No cedar filter. No fern camouflage. No strategic modulation. Just Lyra. The original signal. The frequency she was born broadcasting and had spent her entire adult life suppressing. It filled the room. Kalen's wolf rose. She felt it happen before she saw it. A shift in the air pressure, a change in the temperature of his skin under her hand, a deepening of something behind his eyes that was not human and not hostile and not anything she had a word for except present. The wolf did not surge. Did not thrash. Did not do the one thing it had been locked away for doing 4 years ago. It rose the way dawn rises, gradual and inevitable and warm, and it looked at her through his eyes, and she looked back, and what passed between them in that moment was not a bond or a claim or a contract. It was recognition. The wolf knew her. Not because of the mating bond. Not because of biology or genetics or the mechanical chemistry of compatible pheromones. It knew her because he knew her, and the wolf and the man were the same creature, and the creature had been watching her for 3 years with a patience that bordered on devotion, and now she was here, and she was real, and she was not running. The wolf settled. For the first time in 4 years, the war inside Kalen Drev ended. Not with a victory. With a ceasefire. His wolf lay down in the space her scent created, and the man who had been holding the walls against it for 1,500 days felt them become unnecessary. He pressed his forehead against hers. They stood like that. Breathing. 2 people who had spent years circling a fire they were afraid to touch, standing in the heat at last, discovering that it did not burn. Tomorrow, she said. Tomorrow, he said. The challenge took place at dawn. The courtyard was full. Every wolf in Blackmore stood along the walls or crowded the balconies, and the air was thick with the collective tension of a pack watching its king prepare to do something he had not done in 4 years. Drusen stood at the center of the courtyard. Calm. Composed. The scar on his face catching the early light. He had shifted already, a lean gray wolf with intelligent eyes and the muscular efficiency of a fighter who had been trained since birth. Kaelin walked into the courtyard in human form. The crowd went silent. Not the polite silence of attention. The hell-breath silence of people watching a man approach a cliff edge. He looked at Lyra. She stood at the eastern wall, right where she had stood the night of the projection, and her scent was open, unmasked, the realest thing in the courtyard. He breathed it in. She saw his chest expand. Saw his eyes change. He shifted. The sound his wolf made when it hit the open air was not a howl. It was something lower and older, a sound that came from the bottom of a 4-year silence and carried the weight of everything that had been locked behind it. It rolled across the courtyard like a physical force, and every wolf present, every single one, dropped. Not bowed. Dropped. Knees to stone. Heads down. An involuntary response to an alpha presence so concentrated that standing upright in its path was like standing upright in a hurricane. Drusen's wolf took one step back. Then another. The fight lasted 11 seconds. Kaelin's wolf crossed the courtyard in 3 strides, and Drusen's wolf, the trained intelligence operative, the Hale Confederacy's best, yielded before contact. Rolled onto his back. Throat exposed. The universal language of a wolf who has done the math and concluded that the math does not work. It was not a victory. It was a statement. The coalition behind Drusen dissolved within the week. The formal challenge was withdrawn. The Continental Accord claim was abandoned. The 6 captured extraction team members were returned to their territories with a message that required no words because the message was the 11 seconds that every wolf on the continent would hear about before the sun set. The Ashbourne bloodline was under the protection of the Alpha King. Anyone who wanted to test that protection was welcome to visit the courtyard. But the story did not end in the courtyard. It ended in the study. That evening. The fire rebuilt, the lamps lit, the door closed. Lyra was sitting in his chair. The one behind the desk. The one no one else had ever sat in, the one that smelled like cedar and iron and 100 late nights spent writing about a woman he could not touch. She was reading the scent journal. From the beginning. Page 1. The clinical entries, the gradual shift, the long slow melt from data to devotion. She read it the way a person reads a letter they have been waiting their entire life to receive, slowly, carefully, giving every word the weight it had earned. Kaelin appeared in the doorway. Showered, dressed, the scar visible at his open collar, the last evidence of a fight that had defined him for 4 years and no longer did. She picked up his pen. Turned to the last page. The page after his final entry, the one that said she's here. She wrote one line. You smell like home. I'm staying. She set the pen down. Closed the book. Left it on the desk where he would find it, the way he had left it in the drawer where she had found it, a conversation conducted in ink and leather across 3 years and 1,000 small, patient, terrified acts of love. He read it from the doorway. Did not cross the room. Did not need to. The distance between them had been doing all the work for 3 years. It had kept them safe. It had kept them separate. It had given them both the space to become the people who could stand in this room and mean it. The distance had done its job. And now, quietly, without ceremony, without a single word spoken, the distance retired. Some distances close themselves.